What is going on, brother? Dr. Gavin Weir is finally in the house. I finally got you on the podcast, man. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here, bro.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, man, long time coming, man. Well, we've been talking for a couple months now. Actually, more than that, because when you opened up your first facility, I was like, we got to get you on the podcast.
Yeah, it was probably, I forget when we met. That had to have been close to a year ago now. I mean, 8 months probably, eight to 10 months.
Yeah, definitely, man. So let's talk about the elephant in the room really quick, man. How's quarantine life treating you, and how's everything going? Are you kind of laying low, or are you keeping your mind and your body busy, or what?
It's give and take, 100%. It's take it day by day. That's all it is. It's especially difficult having one business and then opening up another one next door, and having that second business be kind of a standard gym / training facility. It's a headache, but you just work with it.
That's awesome, man. So community, I know Gavin's never been on once. Usually a lot of our guests come on once or twice, but Gavin, if you can just Dr. Gavin Weir, I apologize. My first doctor on the show, by the way, so congratulations on that, man.
Fake doctor, but we're good with
that. Don't say that. Don't say that. You've done the work. It's true. If you would just like to kind of go a little bit of background on who Dr. Gavin Weir is to the community, that'd be great, man. Introduce yourself.
Yeah. So I'm a doctor of physical therapy, as well as a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Now USAW Olympic weightlifting coach. What else do I have behind my name? At the end of the month, I'll have a sports nutrition certification, emergency response for the athlete certified, plenty of different things. But what it really comes down to is anything movement related or related to the athlete. That's what I try to specialize in. That's what my background is. Worked with pro athletes, continue to work with pro athletes, but my kind of passion lies within that youth athlete group. So high school athletes, and that's why I opened up my facility here in Frankfort, Method Athletics. We opened up in October of 2019, been going strong through that whole time. Saw a need for a little bit more of like a traditional weight room, I guess you could say, for these high school athletes. That might not necessarily be looking for personal training. They just want a place to lift, as well as powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters. So in late February, early March, we started building out Method Power Gym next door. And then the whole COVID situation hit right smack in the middle of March when we were about a week away from opening. So we've been just sitting on that, making sure everything's perfect in that time period and getting ready to go on that. So two businesses right next door to each other, both shut down, but just working through.
Hey, man, it'll be open soon enough, and it is beautiful. You guys, if you are not watching this on YouTube, you need to just click on it really quick and watch the first 5 minutes. Gavin is actually right in front of his black and white wall. He has beautiful black and white in both of his facilities, and everything's done super perfect, man. So I just want to congratulate you on that. It's one of those things where when you finally walk into a place and your jaw drops, I don't know if you were going for the wow factor as much as the professional look, but dude, I think you've hit A to Z in what you were going for. And I'm always impressed every time I walk into your facilities.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. It was a lot of work, blood, sweat, and tears, especially on my end with the build out sort of deal. But the goal really was just to show the attention to detail that I like to have. I think that's one thing that I want my athletes that I work with to have is an attention to detail. So if they walk into the facility and things are just kind of haphazardly thrown together and it looks like an 80s era Gold's gym, then they're not going to have that same approach as when they walk into a facility and it's clean, it's put together, it looks disciplined, so they behave a little bit more disciplined. I think that's one thing from talking to other coaches in the area when it comes to strength coaching, personal training, what have you, is that they struggle with these age groups with making sure that these kids or young adults are approaching training with the right mentality. And I think just creating the environment of discipline and neat and in order and everything's in place helps them act out that way as well. So
yeah, I do think we can dive into the mindset of that too. And like, I'm all about mindset and how everything has to work off of that as being the base. Do you feel like you do kind of like you bring that to the table when people walk in, they're like, oh, okay, now it's serious. Like now these kids actually know what to do, how to act, and you actually don't have to say what you want when they come in. They should know after the first time, like, hey, this is what we're doing. Kind of like, if you don't like it, there's a door type mentality. I think it's kind of like, do you feel that that's a huge in the mindset to actually be in the right place for your training, no matter what it be?
No, I agree 100%. I think we can always talk about that type of training should be used within a youth athlete, but even at the professional level, these athletes have a hard time getting within the right headspace. Like there are psychologists that work for these sports teams, particularly baseball teams, that help address these issues with the professional athletes. So it's a problem that occurs across the entire spectrum, and it's not only athletes, it's people as well. So I think mindset is a huge thing, being in the right environment. I think that's something that probably has hit home for a lot of people, being at home outside of the gym too, is they might have access to the same equipment that they do at home that they do at a gym. They might have built out a home gym, but it's just not the same. And
Right.
so environment is 100% a factor in training. And I think youth athletes just get impacted by it a little bit more than the rest of us do. But again, it's a problem across the whole spectrum. So that's why we don't do group training here. It's all either one-on-one, or it's kind of like an open process. So I'll onboard an athlete with, 6 or 8 sessions over the first month, just make sure that they learn the movements and the core base of what we do here. And then we build out programs for them to come in and train on their own schedule. So that's one thing that has kind of worked out, where it's not a group class. It's something that's built specifically for them. And they can come in and get their work done. And it teaches them self-discipline. It teaches them how to perform the movements without, I guess, like a personal trainer sitting right there looking at them. Maybe I'm across the gym, across the facility, and I got an eye on them, but they don't know it. So if it comes down to they're not doing the movement right because they don't have their button to gear, then I can kind of step in and do that. So it's worked out really well so far. I'm really happy with how the athletes have been progressing along.
Yeah, and that's very what you do too is besides the movement part, we can get into that in a minute, but you are very sports specific and position specific as well. Also, like linemen to receivers to running backs to first baseman, outfielder, like you are very sports specific in what they need to be doing. Obviously, at your level of teaching and your level of coaching, where you're at and what you've learned over the past, you're not going to train a lineman the same as a running back. And like, don't you,
Yeah.
you build out those programs per position, don't you also? It's kind of like one of your specialties to do.
Yeah. I think sports specificity, especially now with training, has kind of become a buzzword too.
Yeah.
Even within the realm of physical therapy, you got probably the most popular physical therapists on Instagram are doing all these fancy exercises with a football player that has a football involved. They're standing on a Bosu ball on one leg, playing catch with a football. There's a time and place for those sorts of things, but sports specific doesn't exactly mean directly mimicking uh, the the movements that these athletes are performing in sport. It's just specifically targeting the muscle groups or the types of movements like a hinge or a squat or something along those lines that translate to their sport. So for instance, with a baseball athlete, I'm going to do a whole lot more shoulder stability work than I'm going to be doing gross strength work, upper body, for like a offensive lineman for football.
Why
So
is that? Can you tell us why that is really quick? Just
yeah,
because it's used so much, as the shoulders are used so much in rotational work. So do you want to focus more on that?
yeah. So I guess probably the best way to explain it would be like a baseball athlete, any throwing athlete for that matter, is going to use a lot more of this. Well, they're going to require a lot more stabilization out of their shoulder girdle than like an offensive or a defensive lineman for football. So, for instance, most of the power from a pitch with a baseball pitcher is going to come from their lower half. We have to do is just set up the athlete in their upper half in the right position for them to maximize that power effectively when it comes to the upper body. So we want to train the shoulder girdle in terms of stabilization and force production in the right way, and maybe doing movements that position their shoulder in something that looks similar to their pitch, as opposed to just developing gross strength. So when it comes
Mm.
to bench pressing, for instance, yeah, we use the bench press for baseball pitchers all the time. And that's one thing that's kind of a hot topic for strength coaches, physical therapists, is that baseball players shouldn't bench. I completely disagree. I think there's no other way, no better way to engage the pec major and the lat than doing the bench press, as long as it's performed correctly. But what we use here is like a band bell bar. So it's a bamboo bar, which you may have seen online. Well, you've seen it because you train in here too, but
Yeah, yeah.
it requires the bar shakes, so it requires stabilization, so they can perform that bench press movement that requires the pec and the lat, but we shift some of that load over to the dynamic stabilizers of the shoulder girdle, so the mid and low trap, upper trap, rotator cuff, that sort of deal. So it's just looking at, hey, how do we get these athletes where they need to go in terms of what needs to be working and what needs to work more over the others. So
Yeah, and I think that's what is super unique about your place. Now, I've seen physical therapists in the past, and I've seen chiropractors in the past, and it's one of those things where it's like I've never felt like I was taken care of. And let me explain really quick before there's a lot of hate mail coming on here. When I came to you, we started training a little bit, and I came up to you after a month or so, and I'm like, hey, this is starting to hurt on me. This is starting to hurt on me. So you had me come in, literally take my shirt off, do the most basic, what I thought was the most basic, like how is he going to even see how I move doing these things? And you were able to pick up a plethora of shit of why I was moving the way I was moving. And let me digress. I believe your place is so specialized in that because you take your athletes through an entire spectrum before you even just throw them underneath the barbell. And I think that's one thing that people don't understand. When you said anything that has to be done with movement during your introduction of this right in the beginning of this podcast, you actually assess the athlete or the client that comes in. Then from there, you know what to do to fix that movement if anything is wrong and that imbalance, because that's usually what things are, right? We think we're injured, but it's usually just an imbalance. I think that's what I think your specialty is. And that's why I just send everybody your way, because without fixing that problem, it's going to continue to go, and the imbalance is just going to grow and grow and grow. And I'm sure you see it every single day of your job.
yeah, I think there's plenty of different things to talk about there when it comes to how you approach the treatment of an athlete or really any individual in that matter. But if someone comes to you from the perspective of a pain problem, for instance, if we're talking about the situation with you, you have to look at it holistically, and not holistically as in we're going to burn some incense and hang out, but you have to look at the whole person in terms of what pain problem they're having. And the best example, again, just to use that baseball athlete, would be a pitcher. So when it comes to Tommy John, with MCL injury at the elbow, but that inside of the elbow injury is most of the time occurring due to an issue somewhere else in the chain. It's not the elbow that's breaking down because it's weak. It's the shoulder It's the shoulder causing that elbow to break down. So we have to look at
Interesting.
what movements someone is performing on a consistent basis and identify the problem before we can actually fix it. And I think that's one thing where I guess, for instance, the whole, and we'll probably get to it at some point too, is the distrust of the medical field now comes from is a lot of people don't like going to physicians. They don't like going to physical therapists because they think, one, it doesn't work, or two, they're not being paid attention to enough. That's a really big problem. I forget the actual number, but it was something along the lines of a physician friend had told me where if you just spend an extra 3 or 4 minutes with a patient before they leave from the physician standpoint, so a medical doctor, where on average those visits last between 8 and 15 minutes. If you just spent an extra 3 or 4 minutes with them, you are 2/3 likely less to be sued. And that's just because you create more of a relationship with the patient and you practice more effectively. So that's one
Wow.
where physical therapists and chiropractors can kind of not capitalize on it, but use that amount of time they spend with a person to their advantage. And it's starting to move further and further away from that just by merit of how our healthcare system is built. We bill hours by the minute in physical therapy, where I put down, I spent 15 minutes with this person, I get X amount of dollars. So if I can get 3 people in the room and work with all of them at the same time, I can bill all of them and get more money. Or if I can dovetail my patients and schedule them every 15 minutes and they're for hour sessions, I get more money that way. So the industry as a whole, the healthcare industry, is just trying to maximize a profit. And that's why I've stepped away from it a little bit, is because I want to spend more one-on-one time with my patients. So
So let's talk about that. Where did the love of that come from? Because I know when you went to school, was there any talk of doing anything else, or did you always know that you want to be a PT, a physical therapist, excuse me? But like, because you were into powerlifting or training at that time,
Yeah.
like you were, you're strong dude, strongest doctor I know. But like, where did that love come from, man? Like, how did you want to start working with athletes? Because is that something that you just kind of took a path to?
Yeah, no, that's a loaded question. Again, probably long answers to short questions, but where this all started, mainly, I think going back, red hair, chubby kid in high school. So I, I was an easy target, so to speak. And when it came down to it, by the time of my freshman year, I was having panic attacks, anxiety attacks. I thought I was getting sick before I would go to school. I ended up missing 14 days. I think it was like the first or second quarter of my freshman year of high school, and primarily impacted by the social stress involved in it. So the one thing that kind of was my saving grace was exercise. I started off with P90X, just rocking that out, the
Right.
beach stuff in my basement, and then went from there into lifting weights. So it took about a year before I had the confidence to walk into a gym. And even then that was nerve wracking. And the love for finding some control over my life within that situation of exercising was fantastic. So I just grabbed onto that, and then from there just wanted to expand my education. So I'm just, when it comes down to it, a massive nerd, and I found something that I loved and I just ran with it. So looking at 10 plus years later now, that's where I'm at. I was really just, what's the best way that I can keep learning about movement and exercise and become a master of it. And that's how I ended up here.
That's awesome, man. I love that. I mean, it just goes to show everybody, like, you never really know, right? Like, I don't even know if we've ever talked at that before personally, even over a beer, but that's one of those things where you just never really know what you want to do until one thing kind of pushes you towards that. And congratulations on that, because I think you're one of the best at what you do, my man.
Yeah. Well, I think, everybody says it too. You walk into a gym, any commercial gym, and most of the time, the biggest guy there is also going to be the one that's most likely to help you. If you walked up to him and said, "Hey, man, I got to learn how to squat," he's going to jump all over that, probably because he came from a place where you were. It might have been 20, 30 years ago, but at one point in time, he was at where you were, and he's excited
Yep.
about the fact that, listen, here's another opportunity for me to pass this information along. So that's what I love so much about like the powerlifting community in specific, is they just love to teach and to learn. They're completely driven by that, and it provides a lot of opportunity for self-discipline and growth, and it's an absolute blast. So I'm I mean, that's just another piece of why I'm excited for Next Door to open, is to get back into that community, because I've been putting all my time in here.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so that's what's really neat. I don't know if we talked about that enough, but your one building, I know when I first started coming there, the place right next to you, which is the exact same size, correct? And then you were like, just wild idea of, we were all just kind of like, hey, you should probably buy the place next door too. And I think after a while, it's kind of like, yeah, I bought it and we're going to do something with it. So how did that come about? Did you just feel like if you were going to move anywhere instead of opening up another shop somewhere else, it was easier to do next door? Or did you just feel like that was a move you had to make? And like, it was a perfect opportunity. It's literally the wall next to your other wall.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always been a dream of mine to own a gym. And when it came down to it, I think after I opened up the clinic, the private facility, Method Athletics, there were more and more of a demand was showing up. So I would interact with high school athletes that wanted to come and train within the facility, but when it came down to their budget, which for the most part is determined by their parents, it just didn't fit, and that's okay. You know, when it comes down to it, the services that you and I provide as physical therapists or personal trainers, they're luxury expenses. So I would meet these athletes that just wanted a place to train and a place to grow and to learn from, as well as met a ton of powerlifters in the area. There wasn't really anything in terms of specialty training, and the space next door was open and I could get it leased. So I decided to give it a shot. I mean, found a way to make it work money wise and made it happen. So it's it's one of those things where I still don't necessarily believe that it's real yet, but hopefully it sticks around for a little bit longer, especially with the COVID situation. But yeah, it's exciting, and I think the area, for one thing, is going to love it. It's one of those things where it's not your standard powerlifting gym. Again, the whole, like we were talking about, it's neat, it's clean, it's put together. All the equipment is brand new. You treat it right, and it treats you right back. So I think a lot of people are going to be really, really happy with it, because it's a powerlifting gym, but it's not a powerlifting gym. So
Right.
it's good.
Yeah, it's definitely not that powerlifting gym that's dark and dungeness. It's definitely beautiful, and everything is brand new. And I think you're gonna have to beat people off with a stick as soon as you open those doors, man, for sure. Because I know, community. If you listen to the last podcast, it was Steve Stremme, and then it was Rami, and everyone just keeps talking and talking and talking about what's going to happen with Method Power. And I think it's going to be amazing. Not to mention the community that's going to be built inside those walls. It will surprise you? Of course it will, as an owner, but I think it's really going to surprise everybody of what you've created, from everything as simple as just the music. I know you made that post on the Method Power Instagram page. If you guys please go follow Method Power Instagram page, and just like posting that for Sonos, how like we're going to have control of the music. I think that's just like, that's fucking unheard of, man. It's just unheard of.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit of a stubborn creativity part, but a lot of it is just because I'm just another one of the guys, and sometimes it comes down to, sometimes it hurts, I guess, the professional relationships, because I'll make a professional relationship with someone, and because I'm so laid back and open about things, like the people will become all buddy with me. But that's just how I am, who I am. But when it came to building the gym next door, I'm another powerlifter. I'm another, I certification in Olympic weightlifting. Like, I know about those things. I've taught seminars to other physical therapists and personal trainers about here's how we identify issues with Olympic movements. And then bodybuilding, like I've worked with bodybuilders before, that sort of deal, where I'm in the gym, I'm the one doing it too. So when it came down to, hey, we need better clips on these bars, I'm going to get the better clips on the bars, because I know how annoying it is to be deadlifting 500 pounds and the plates are sliding all over. So it's all those small things that I think are going to make the real difference for people. But it just comes from a place of, I guess, shared experience.
Yeah, and it looks like you definitely put everything that you've ever wanted into this gym selfishly for yourself. I know you did.
Yeah, no, it's funny, because I had to hold myself back a little bit. I haven't spoken too much about it, but one thing that we're doing to help build up the community too is we've set aside like an equipment fund. So there are pieces of equipment that I was realizing, might not necessarily need it. But so I set some of that money aside before pulling the trigger on things, and we're going to hold polls within the first 3 months of opening, and as well as into the
Wow.
future too, where people can suggest pieces of equipment, and then we'll vote on it. And if it gets enough votes and it's within the budget, then we're going to pull the trigger on that sort of thing. So just another way for people to kind of determine, like, hey, this is a second home for me, and I get to pick what's in here as well. So.
Well, I could definitely say that that's unheard of. So good job on that. I think that's a really neat thing too. And I think you're going to have a lot of really neat equipment. Can you share any just a little bit of what you guys are actually going to have in there? Can you share just a couple things?
Yeah. So I mean, anybody that's been following the Instagram knows it as well. But there's 4 deadlifting platforms with band pegs, 6 power racks, 4 of which are standard power racks. Another 2 are going to have ISO arms, jammer arms attached onto them. They allow essentially those racks to be converted into really any upper body, as well as plenty of lower body movements that you want machine wise. Cable attachments on those guys too, functional trainer for cable movements, combo rack, calibrated plates, Olympic bumper plates, Olympic barbells, Bella bars, deadlift bars, belt squat, a standalone belt squat, 50 feet of turf, landmines, just anything when it comes to functional training. I hate to use the buzzword, but
Right.
looking at non-machine training, everything's in there. And when it comes to the machines, we got 2 guys that will turn into anything really that you want it to be, as long as you're creative with it. And our staff will always be around to help people set stuff up on that end too, but it's pretty much everything.
Dude, that's awesome. I mean, congratulations on all that. I can't wait to see it. And I can tell people I walked through when you were unboxing some things and I couldn't go too far. And I've walked in it when it was an empty space, and all I see now and drooling over all of your pictures. So good job with the Instagram too. It's definitely beautiful pictures on Instagram. And I think everyone's going to be super surprised. Like I said, community, go over there and check out the Instagram page as well, because it is pretty mind blowing, man. It really is. So let's get in a little bit of the training part, man. I know with all those things you just said too, with all the bands, I think that's something that a lot of gyms don't know what they are, or they've probably seen it due to many powerlifters out there, probably the Godfather himself, Louis Simmons. Everyone knows what bands look like, but I don't think really people understand what bands actually do and how beneficial they can really be. Do you feel that that's a staple in yourself or your own training and or the program that you give to all your athletes? Is that something that you'll just never stray from and you believe in it completely?
Without a doubt.
Okay.
Yeah. I would agree. I've listened to Ross's podcast as well. So I know you guys have touched on, as well as, I mean, if people have been listening to things, the Louis Simmons side, West Side Barbell. But what it comes down to is, and West Side has been one of the biggest groups alongside of Elite FTS to, I guess, perpetuate the knowledge regarding accommodating resistance is what I prefer to call it as. Where the resistance on the barbell is changing throughout the range of motion of a movement. So you can do that with plenty of different training tools. You can do it with bands, you can do it with chains. I've seen people use like rip cords too. That's another thing oh man, I'm going to struggle with the name. That's terrible. But there's plenty of different ways that you can change the intensity of the movement throughout its range of motion. And that's why I love bands so much, is one, they're easy to set up. When it comes to the chains, they're just a complete pain in the ass to get together. So the bands are really effective because you just slap them on, as long as you have the parts to it, like band pegs on a deadlift platform, right, band pegs on your squat rack, you're good to go. And the bands are cheap and effective. So they're really easy way to use accommodating resistance. But accommodating resistance, all it does is it makes the movement harder where it is easiest, and it makes the movement easier where it is hardest. So for instance, with a deadlift, picking the weight up off the ground is generally the portion of the movement that's most difficult. So the weight is lighter because the tension on the band isn't there. And then as you get closer to the lockout of a deadlift, the weight is, or the resistance is increased, and it's easier at that portion of the range of motion of the movement. So what it allows an athlete to do is to train closer to 100% effort throughout the entire range of motion of the movement. So it, for one, requires athletes to increase their force output as they go through the range of motion, which is something that happens frequently during sport. For instance, with a sprint, you want to continuously drive through the wall, so to speak. If we're training athletes to sprint, it's often giving them that cue of there's a wall in front of you, and you need to push and continue to drive through it. So it kind of creates that wall for them there. And then the other portion is it helps reduce the likelihood of injury. So generally, the most torque or the lever arm is increased on the lumbar spine or the low back at the bottom of the deadlift or off the ground. So if we can decrease the amount of resistance there and increase the amount of resistance at the lockout where there is less of a moment arm or torque on the spine, then we'll be better off there as well. So it's a safe training tool. It's effective from sport applicability. It's just all around appropriate to use in athletes. And it's almost interesting to me because accommodating resistance within the strength and conditioning world isn't exactly favored upon. Which me, I'll never necessarily understand. But
I mean, yeah, and you see so many people too that, like, if you see anyone that just starts using them, like, they break through their plateaus right away. It's so wild to see because they've never built that type of strength before. And since I've used them before, but probably very improperly until I came to your place, and the things that I was doing and how strong I got just on my bench press right away, I was like, how the fuck is this possible, man? Like, it's so weird. You think you're so strong until you start using the bands for resistance. And you're like, and you know what? It doesn't beat you up as much as you would get underneath some heavier weight. For me personally, I know this may just be a personal thing. But it doesn't beat me up as much, like doesn't fuck my shoulders up as much as just trying to push through 80-90% of things, which shouldn't do it anyway at my age, you know what I'm saying? But putting those bands on there, it really, you're not beat up the next day, you know what I'm saying? You're not having a hard time showering.
Yeah. Well, it's Gray Cook talks about it, where you have self-limiting exercises. And I believe the most well-known example of his is barefoot running. I don't like to use the barefoot running example as much, but the idea is that with the self-limiting exercise, it's much less likely to hurt yourself, because if you're doing it incorrectly, you will either stop doing it or you cannot perform the movement. So another example that he uses is the front squat. So if you have the barbell in front of yourself and you lose your position on the front squat, that barbell is going to end up on the ground
Right.
before you hurt yourself in most situations. And again, that's not an end all be all allegory, but it is a good idea to try to incorporate as many self-limiting exercises within an athlete's training as possible, because you do want that mental intensity there where they're approaching a movement and trying to work close to 100%. You never want an athlete maxing out on a consistent basis, but you want them near maximal effort on some training days. So it's best to use a self-limiting exercise. And in my opinion, I think the bands are a form of self-limiting exercise, where if you hit a portion of the range of motion where the weight's increasing and you just can't meet it, that band's going to win first before you start having a problem. And then you can just get rid of the weight or call for a spot, for instance. And then when it comes to the shoulder deal, I mean, you're using bands on a bench press. The shoulder is in a compromised, not a compromise, but it's more likely to become compromised in the position where the barbell is directly on your chest. That's just how our shoulders work. That front of the shoulder, the anterior joint capsule, is getting stretched out in that position. So if we can decrease the amount of load in that position, we'll be better off. And it's very similar to doing like a pin press or a deadlift off blocks, where you're overloading the movement in a different range of motion. You're just using bands.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. I love everything about that. And you said you have them old squat racks too, right? Like basically anywhere that you go in the new gym, and in Method Athletics as well as Method Power, you can use bands basically anywhere, right?
Yeah. I think that's anywhere in the facility. That's the tough thing too, is with the COVID situation, we're now waiting on getting more bands in stock with these places. All the bands we bought from Westside, because I know those guys beat them up enough where if they're using their own bands, then we're good to go to buy those things. So hopefully have enough bands for next door, but they're awesome tools. I think they're just a blast to work with too. They're fun because you can, figure out, you grab a fish hook or a suitcase, or I forget the name of it, but a suitcase scale, and you can figure out what resistance is on the bands at the top. And it like any high school athlete, they want to lift the most weight possible. So when you tell them they're lifting a heavier weight at the top, it gets them involved too. So
yeah, that's true. I never thought about it that way too. It's just like, yeah, Doc, you're right. That's great.
that's fine. Yeah, I'd like to tell myself that too. That's 600.
And we do all the time. We're lifting so heavy. Would you look at that, man? We are strong.
400 pounds on the ground.
That's awesome. Where would one start with the bands too? Because I know there's different thicknesses of the bands, and is there actually an actual program that you can go through with the bands? Like, when do you scale up from a red to a black band and a black to a green band? Is there anything that like you need to do if anyone's listening to this to kind of go through those processes, or they just start with the red and kind of figure it out from there through the reps and ranges? I know that's a huge answer or a huge question, but
so there's different colors to the bands, and every company uses a different set of colors. But in general, what you're going to run into is like mini bands. With Westside, they're red. With most companies, they're red. I think Elite FTS is one of the ones where they're green. But using the smallest band and then scaling up from there is obviously the best idea, because it is jarring at first to get that change in tension. And for some people, it does not feel comfortable in the sense of this doesn't feel right. It's not uncomfortable from a pain perspective, but it's just, man, this is a completely new movement to me. And that's why the guys at Westside use it, is because they drive a lot of their training behind CNS adaptation. So if you perform a movement too frequently, you're going to adapt to that movement, or your central nervous system is going to adapt to that movement too quickly, and you're not going to get the desired training effect. So that's why they use the bands, which I agree to an extent. I think it's a little bit too quickly for them, especially with high school athletes. And we can get in that if we want to. But my general recommendation is start with the smaller band and just work up as you feel comfortable. I'm really big on the whole RPE, or the rating of perceived exertion. That's one thing that is an awesome training tool because it allows athletes to train submaximally, but also listen to what their training feels like. So they
Ah,
can done with a movement and reflect on it. Whereas most athletes, they get a sheet of paper at the beginning of their workout from their strength coach and they bust through it, and then that's it. They never think about what they just did. So if you give an athlete the goal of, hey, I want you to define your RPE, or I even just want you to write down how many reps you did, they have to reflect on what they just did. So
yeah, that's like a really good conversational topic too, because I know there's a lot of talk about what's better, percentage work or RPE scale. And a lot of people don't understand the RPE scale. And a lot of people are just like, just give me the fucking percentages and I'll do the percentages. But even with that, you can kind of say, if you're a mindful athlete, even with the percentages, let's just say if you hit 5x5 at 85% of a back squat, if your first set feels like shit, we can talk about that. Like, you should understand that you shouldn't grind out the next, 20 reps or 15 reps you have left. Like, figure it out and go from there. And I think that's what the RPE scale is really good at. It's like, okay, hit a 7 or hit an 8, like, out of the 10. And it's like, how do you feel? Just like, I don't know, it's a little heavy today. Then it kind of gives you that variance of, I can only go that hard today. And I think that's a lot of mindful work too, coming from the athlete. And I think we just kind of will burn through that. Like, someone says you have to do a 5x5 at 85 back squat, let's just say, like, I'm just going to do it. Like, fifth set, everything's felt like shit. Let's just keep on going.
well,
What's your,
sorry, didn't mean to cut you off,
yeah,
but I'm getting excited about it too, because it's one of those things where a lot of what we know about strength and conditioning, particularly within the college athletic space, is pulled from Olympic weightlifting. So weightlifting as a sport, and being part of the Olympics, drove a lot of the research behind training, looking to increase like training effect within athletes, mainly because of the country aspect of it. So you had a sport, Olympic weightlifting, that was within the Olympics, and you had Russia and the U.S. going back and forth within the 80s on Olympic weightlifting, and this was a point of national pride. Like, you were in the middle of this massive kind of Cold War era, back and forth, where the U.S. had to be better than Russia at everything, and vice versa, where these scientists were well funded
yeah,
to research on strength and conditioning effectively, but just for Olympic weightlifting. So from that standpoint, a lot of our kind of core model of what we know about repetition schemes and training effect comes from Olympic weightlifting. But the mentality hasn't transferred over very well in that period of time. So a lot of athletes approach things with the mentality of going all out 100% all the time. And we don't necessarily look at submaximal training a whole lot. And now it's coming back, which is great. I think that's awesome, because we should be. It helps prevent injury. But it's just one of those things that didn't translate, even though we still use Olympic weightlifting movements. We still use different rep schemes like 8 to 12 reps. But the Olympic weightlifters, they don't train nearly as hard as I think a lot of strength and conditioning coaches for college programs are putting their athletes through. And that's something that we can learn from them, is the goal of developing a training program for anyone, and more specifically an athlete, is to create or just get over the amount of stimulus required to create a training effect. So
right.
you want the athlete to train as little as possible to get the desired effect. So if you're overtraining an athlete, you're going to run into other issues. And that's one thing that I think we lose a lot in the communication with these Olympic weightlifters. These guys, that's all they're focused on. They're hitting very, very low repetitions for their movements that are the Olympic lifts, because things need to look perfect in order for it to happen well. And that's the beautiful thing about that sport. In powerlifting, in athlete training, back squats, deadlifts, hang cleans, for a lot of these athletes, as well as their coaches, the movement quality, it doesn't matter. And that's one thing that we need to get back onto, is submaximal training with a high quality movement.
No, dude, I love that you said that too. Cause I mean, that can go for anything really. I mean, even if you're, excuse me, even if you're just just a run of the mill like the gen pop that goes into, like, you have to understand that, like, just because you go to the gym or try to go to the gym 8 days a week doesn't mean you're going to have the best output of that day. And just to recap really quick, what you were saying about athletes or just the gen pop in general, less is almost more at that point, because you can get back in the next day and the next day, then take a rest day and then get back in the following day, as opposed to destroying yourself, pushing your face into the fucking dirt and trying to come back the next day and like, oh, I don't want to be here. Now everything's changed, right? You have less sleep because you pound yourself in the ground, and it just goes on. The dominoes just fall the opposite way that you want them to fall at that point. Is that kind of like the recap of what you're kind of saying? The more we train at a higher, lower intensity, but just past that threshold in order to come back, to recover, come back the next day, and again and again and again, to actually have proper adaptation to our programming.
Exactly. You're looking for a long-term training effect, and that's the goal.
Right.
And a lot of athletes, particularly youth athletes, they see massive training effects in the beginning of their training at the high school level, where they just start getting into the weight room and their bench press goes up 100 pounds in 2 months. And that is not necessarily an increase in gross strength. They're just getting better at a skill. So you start bench pressing, you're going to get better at bench pressing. But at a certain point, all of that training effect just from getting better at the skill starts to diminish, and you start running into less and less gains over time. And that can be have an effect on their psyche, where they're still looking for that 10 pounds every week. But if we can communicate with an athlete effectively, hey, we're looking for 5 pounds every 2 weeks or every month, that still adds up to 60 to 100 pounds.
That's insane.
Over a year. And if we can do that 4 times, you got an athlete lifting a ton of weight, and that's going to transfer to their sport effectively, as long as that ton of weight looks good. That's the one thing is, yeah, I hear about high school athletes, and a lot of the time the high school athletes come in and they say, hey, I can squat 400 pounds. And we get them underneath a bar performing the movement correctly, and it's not even close to like 300. It's one of those things where it's just not it's not translated very well to these athletes, where we want movement quality over everything, because your sport is not to lift weights. Your sport is to play on the field. And if we got them lifting weights and that's contributing to either overuse injuries or setting their mechanics up for injury on the field, we now have an athlete that's not playing. And that's not the goal. My goal is to make you better, not get you off the field. And I don't care if you're the strongest guy sitting on the bench. I want you to be on the performing.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the beauty. That's the beauty of what you do, though. You know, it's like that's exactly how it should be. And you see it how long has it been? It's still going on today. Where, when is it going to change? When is this type of thinking going to get into the high school weight room? I know there's probably no money for it or no budget for it, but at least if athletes can come to your facility and your trainers that are in there and understand that the movement is wrong and this is how you do the movement, I think some things will open up in their head. Their mindset will be like, wait a minute, man, I've been doing this for how long? The wrong way. Now I'm doing it the right way. My knees feel better. My hips, my ankles feel better. My mobility is better. I can now perform the movement the correct way. And holy shit, like just a mindset around that too is like, I'm doing it the right way, as opposed to, that some of these younger athletes, when they're in the weight room, they're not calling each other on depth, or they don't care if they're on depth or not, because they can just say, I got a 400-pound back squat at 14 years old. It's like, there is a play in there too, but it's like, when is that going to end, man? Like, I mean, I'm sick of it, because these kids at freshman, sophomore, junior, senior levels, they shouldn't be having fucking surgery, man. They're in high school.
Yeah, I think it's just encouraging, like we were talking about before, encouraging that mentality around being disciplined. There's all these high school sports, they love having that aggressive mentality of, we're going to get our work in and it's going to be awesome and we're going to get done and we're going to be the best. And that's 100% what you can accomplish with a more toned down emotional aspect to it. So with my athletes in here, I am almost never yelling. I think I've probably yelled maybe once or twice when we were looking for like a PR just for the sake of hitting it, because we had it programmed and set up for that day and somebody was killing it, where I've just hollered from the back once. But it's never been a screaming in your ear, balls to the wall environment, because if we can get an athlete to perform in an emotional state that isn't 100%, they're going to perform even better in an emotional state that is 100%. You need to be able to perform things controlled when you're not under pressure, so you can perform things controlled under
Mm.
pressure. That's why practice is a thing. You get out onto the field and you practice because there isn't pressure of messing up nearly as much as when you're playing a game and you're in the state finals. There's a whole lot of pressure there. There's an emotional aspect for that athlete that they're dealing with that we don't want to replicate within the weight room. You need things to look good and you need them to be in the right psyche in order to train effectively.
I love it, man. I think more trainers, more coaches, more physical therapists, they need to, get on top of that. Cause I think correct movement is less injuries. We all know that. And usually an imbalance could just be, you're not strong enough on this side or that side. And it's one of those things like kids and Gen Pop can't go 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the line moving the exact same way when something hurts. And I think you've done a great job of kind of trying to chisel away at that. And it sucks because it's like, you have such a great facility and I've never seen anything like your facility before. And it's like, damn it, man. We just need to like win that big ass lottery and put about 100 of these out in the US. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think I mean, I agree that and I've learned too from awesome mentors of mine. There's a company in Chicago that I worked with, Performance in Motion, while I was in school as my last rotation, and that's where a lot of kind of this mentality has come from. And then I built a bit more of the strength and conditioning side on top of it. So they were primarily physical therapists, but they had also done performance training things as well. So they were a big component of developing my professional outlook as well. So I can't thank them enough for that. And then they've pulled from other great companies as well. Exos is another big one down in the city, or not in the city, sorry. They have locations in Texas, Arizona, Florida. They work with Navy SEALs. They put out, I think, I forget the exact numbers, but at least 80 plus athletes that are drafted in the NFL every year.
Holy
They're
shit.
working with those guys, prepping them from the combine. And they're not well known in the general community, but within the strength and conditioning world and sports training, they're really well known. And they've been doing a lot of really good work in the past several years to work on, those sorts of things, training outside of that traditional kind of 80s and 90s era beat them up in the weight room sort of deal. And then
Right.
the other thing too that I wanted to comment on is movement quality is tops. Like 100%, we need movement to look good. But if you're training and you're training hard, things are going to break down a little bit, and that's okay too. It's always a set of criteria that you should be setting for an athlete where I wanted them to make sure that this, and this is happening, and that this, and this isn't happening. So there's always a neutral zone within what you're looking for. And if somebody's working hard enough, things are going to break down. So without a doubt, things don't always look perfect, but they should look darn near it, or at least the athlete should be aware of what does look like perfect and working in that direction.
Yeah, it's all just about that education and having them understand through repetition of the movement, right? Like the more you can get them in the repetition state, and then they can take that with them wherever they go, and they know, oh wait, hey, that didn't feel right like that time. Let me digress and like think about what Dr. Gavin told me. Oh, I forgot about this. I forgot about that. And it's one of those things like just education on top of education with these kids, right?
And a lot of it too is the training style changes just by merit of their age as well as their experience. Where traditionally you look at the research, and if you want someone to develop gross strength or power, you want them operating within a certain rep range. So for instance, gross strength, you want them sitting between that 2 and 6 rep range, or above 90%, or at 9 RPE or 8 RPE, really whatever research you subscribe to in terms of what you want to follow. That is the hard and fast from a data and information perspective of that's where strength builds. But if you look at it in the grand scheme of things with a youth athlete, sometimes if you want to develop their gross strength, you should be performing higher repetitions, 8 to 15 repetitions, just by merit of creating practice for them.
Mm.
Because practice makes perfect. And if they get to practice first with a lighter load and make things look good, they'll understand how it's supposed to feel when they do get back to that 2 to 6 rep range. So sometimes it's like, man, I really need this guy to get just stronger and bigger, or I just need this athlete to be a little bit more explosive on their sprint. Maybe they just need a little bit more practice there. So more repetitions might be okay, but you have to account for it elsewhere. So you don't want someone doing, thousands of repetitions in a workout. But if you want them to get better at one thing, give them a little bit more of that thing. You want to get better at deadlifting, deadlift more. You want to get better at sprinting, sprint more.
Yeah, I think there's another argument there too, where a lot of people are like, you don't have to keep doing the same movement to get stronger. Just do all the accessory work. It's like, well, if it's not getting any stronger, there's probably a reason. And that's probably because you're moving, you're not moving correctly. And I think a lot of people have to take a step back and take some weight off a bar. And you know how it works. I mean, you see egos all the time, no matter male or female, from young to old, like, no, I'll just keep putting more weight on. It's like, no, it's coming. I can tell you the injury is coming. I can see it happening. The breakdown's going to happen, my guy.
And just follow the money too. I think that's one thing where if you follow the trend within the past 5 years, you look at social media, Instagram has become huge. Back when, we're a little bit apart on age, but when it comes to these high schoolers, none of them have Facebook. And I feel so out of touch because they're like, man, you use Facebook still? I'm all Instagram. Oh,
shut up, young kids.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I'm not even that old. But when you look at it, just from that perspective, is social media has changed so much within the past 10 years. And if you follow the money idea of training, what makes the most money right now is selling bulk programming. So a lot of people put emphasis on how important their programming is, like what accessory movements am I doing to build up my deadlift, instead of focusing on, does that look good and am I listening to my body appropriately? Because it makes more money to sell programs. I can't go online. If I have 1 million followers on Instagram, I can't sell them, hey, I'm going to look at all of your training videos and say, hey, that doesn't look right. Or I'm going to listen to you tell me about how you feel day to day on these workouts and modify what you're doing day to day. But what I can do is sell 1 million people each my templated workout. And that's why programming, in my opinion, this is just a theory of mine, has become so popular within the past, especially within the powerlifting community, within the past 5 years at minimum, because there's just more money in that. And so if these big figureheads within the industry start pushing that more, there's going to be more emphasis there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, playing devil's advocate, people are like, well, I don't know, man. I bought programming and it jumped up all my lifts by 50, 60, 70 pounds. It's like, because you actually stuck to something for 8 to 12 weeks. That's probably why. But that's a great point too, because I just had this conversation too with one of a trainer that I know. And he was like, how many clients you got now? And I'm like, what do you mean? I have a couple more than last time I talked to you a couple months ago. And he's like, well, what happens if you do this or do that? It's like, listen, man, like, me. Like, if I get too many clients, I don't want to work with 50 people. I want to work with a small group of people so I can individualize and talk to them through fitness, through nutrition, and through mindset. The bigger that I get, the more people that I get, 50 to 100, it'll be lost in the mix, and I'll be giving everyone the same advice. And and I know that doesn't work. And if you want something done correctly, it has to really be individualized and or strength or sports specific. Once again, those cliche words, but that's kind of like exactly what you're saying, right? Like, you can't give 100% focus to 1 million people. You know what I'm saying? You have to give it to this group of people.
I agree completely.
Right. And it has to be that way, man.
Yeah. It's just merit of the same thing. Like we were talking about with physical therapy and healthcare, it's become a volume game.
Yeah.
And
it's a shame, man. It really is.
Yeah, that's just been my business approach as well as personally, is if I put my best foot forward with everyone and put in the time, then they're going to talk to more people and they're going to talk to more people. And that will be my lifeblood, as opposed to just looking for volume. And so far it's paid off well. It's not one of those things where the business is rolling in money hand over fist, but I've created a small community of people that are engaged. I am proud enough to call some of my patients and plenty of my clients, particularly the professional guys, my friends, because a lot of the pro athletes that I'm working with in here are around my age, and we can connect on those things, and we spend enough time together in the one-on-one capacity that, I can call them a friend. So I think that's one thing that especially physicians now too need to spend a little bit more time with. I can't tell you enough how many times, and physical therapists too, where a patient has come to me either from a physician or from another physical therapist, which is even more disappointing, and have told me that they felt like they were abandoned, or they came in and they had a script for bicep tendonitis, and it's not anything close to bicep tendonitis.
What
Where
causes that though? Like, what was that? Just because they're on the clock type thing and they just want to rifle through people? I mean,
I,
something like that when it comes in and you can diagnose it in 5 minutes. Let's just say 15 minutes on the high end. It's like they didn't tell you this and they didn't tell you that, and how does this feel? And you're like scratching your head. Like that took me less than an hour to figure out that, and you came in here. How long have you been going to? Like, what's the reason behind that? Is that just a money thing or?
think there's plenty of different reasons.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it too, from the physician standpoint, one, that's not their rodeo. Like you get good at what you do, and I don't cut people open on a daily basis. I don't prescribe medications. I don't provide medical diagnoses. So when someone comes into me and they say, "Hey, my doc said this is bicep tendonitis. Is it bicep tendonitis?" I can't say, "Yeah, it is," or "No, it isn't," for sure, because I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a physical therapist. But what I can say is, this is what is impacting your pain problem, and this is how we're going to fix it. I have a suspicion that it is rotator cuff tendonitis over bicep tendonitis, but because I'm not a physician, I can't do that. So from a physician standpoint, a lot of it is, it's just not their rodeo, and it's better off for them to write a script to physical therapy and just get them out of the office to the right person. And I applaud them for that, because a lot of physicians don't, where you'll go in, and I'll caution anybody listening too, if you ever go to a physician with a pain problem and they immediately are recommending surgery or injections, and they don't send you to a physical therapist prior to, run the opposite way 100%. It is absolutely ridiculous and borderline unethical in most situations to do that, because it's much better to at least try something that's non-invasive, where I'm not taking medication, cortisone, and injecting it into your joint or performing surgery. It's much better to try physical therapy first and see if it'll work than to just start off with the invasive stuff. So that's one recommendation on that end. And I've had patients that have come in where they've been, yeah, I got 3 cortisone injections before they even recommended me to physical therapy. And that's unethical in my opinion. It just doesn't make any sense, even from a common sense standpoint. But
That just has to come back to a money thing, man, because they just keep coming back. Oh, you come back in 3, 6 months, come back in 3, 6 months. Just like training, you're going to get used to that, right? Like you'll eventually be like, it's not working anymore. Like, oh, well, we have to up your ante of this script, or here's a new script to take on top of it. It's like, now look at the problems that we're going to have. Not to mention these things have, massive side effects at the end, not just with your own mindset, but I mean, like they could have physical things too. So I think, thank you for telling the community, like you have to always look go talk to someone else. A conversation isn't going to cost you anything, or at least it fucking shouldn't cost you anything. At least it shouldn't. If it does go somewhere else,
yeah, but it's like you said, there is without a doubt a money driven emphasis on some of these things, but there also is the perspective of, from the physical therapist side, where these physicians might have referred a patient that has a certain pain problem to a physical therapist consistently, and the physical therapist has never been able to fix it. And in the physician point, it's, I sent that person to physical therapy and it didn't work, so we have to do this. And say, hey, I've done that 8 times with a patient, I'm just going to start injecting them every time they come in, because I'm going to say, well, here we go again. I'm going to send them to a physical therapist and they're going to come back still in the same problem. So let's just skip that 6 or 8 weeks of the issue and go right to it. When in reality, it was the lack of either knowledge base or time or context of the physical therapy clinic to perform the result to make these people better. So for instance, I guess one example, I had a patient come in that had been to a physical therapist, had done 5 or 6 weeks of physical therapy, had a torn labrum in their hip, and they had surgery scheduled, and they were going to be out of work for 8 months. And then by recommendation from a friend, they came and saw me. They had no business having surgery. They were, without a doubt, did not need it. It was just the issue of the physical therapist that they were working with prior to was perpetuating their pain problem by misidentifying what the issue was. So she worked with me for 3 weeks. Pain was gone. Still some issues with sprints, that sort of deal, but over the course of the next 4 or 5 weeks, all good to go. No surgery happened. So sometimes these physicians, they just see, hey, thumbs up or thumbs down on physical therapy, instead of asking, was that physical therapy high quality. And from the same standpoint with physical therapists too, I think we need to start holding each other more accountable. All healthcare practitioners. There's a movement now where, well, it's probably died down with the COVID situation, but a lot of physicians are saying that we need to start holding other healthcare practitioners more accountable for poor care, because we're the only ones that recognize that poor care. So, someone off the street or a patient isn't going to be able to have a visit with a physician or a physical therapist and realize that was bad, because they don't know. And it's like, if I call a plumber into my house and the plumber tells me something's wrong with my toilet and I don't know anything about the toilet, I'm going to say, yeah, fix it, go ahead. And I'm not going to know if it was good or bad. So, yeah.
Yeah. So do you see, is that a troublesome thing for you in your business too? Like, do you see a lot of people that come in and they're just kind of like, I don't think that this is a movement thing. I think this might be a surgery thing. And you're like, no, oh, but you can only say so much, right? You can't be like, I guarantee, because obviously you can't say that. But do you find it hard to, when people come in, they're like, I just don't get this type of voodoo that you do?
Yeah, there's always, and that a lot of that comes from experience, but there are clinical prediction rules too. So there's research out there that identifies, hey, if, for instance, Ottawa ankle rules. If an athlete has an injury, like they roll their ankle on a court and they have pain at their medial or lateral malleoli, or they can't bear weight on and walk on that leg, then they have to, or they should go get x-rays. So there are rules like that that are set up for us where we can learn about them and know, hey, if a patient comes in and they're presenting this way, we can say, the research has said that we might have to have surgery on this. Or we can just talk about from our anecdotal experience as well, as long as we're being honest with the patient. And that's the biggest thing that I go with is, I'm going to have an upfront conversation. I'm going to tell them, listen, I can't guarantee results, but in general, this is what I've seen in the past. And this is what we're going to go with planning forward, and provide options to patients. I think that's the biggest thing too, is I've had patients that have gone into surgeons and the surgeon said, nope, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. We need to do surgery next week. Instead of providing information to the patient, they just say, this is what has to happen. Oh. And my recommendation to anybody listening is ask questions. I mean, they are there working for you. So stop them from leaving the door and say, hey, no, hold up a second, doc. Like, we got to slow down and you have to explain what the actual problem is to me, and then learn about those things too. So if they say, hey, this is issue, go learn about it. Don't become an armchair physician where you're like, well, it's this, and that, but try to learn a little bit more about what's going on, because then that way, when you get a second opinion, you're a little bit more informed. So it's one of those things where I think it's just the culture of healthcare has created an issue with asking questions and becoming informed, where it needs to be a little bit more of educating the patient and connecting with them, as opposed to just treating what's sitting in front of you.
I love it, man. I think that's definitely a great way to look at it. And I think you have a great business that is doing that and putting that forward of everything, and not really suggesting the other side, or not suggesting the other side at all. And just getting stronger in general could be, the baseline for a lot of people to cure a lot of different things through movement and imbalances, man. And I think you really have opened up the doors to something that could, I hope, just spread like wildfire throughout your community and your space.
Yeah. Like you said, I think people just generally need, not generally, but there's plenty of athletes that walk through the door and they just need to get a little bit stronger. They have all this mobility, particularly youth female athletes. They really get the shit end of the stick when it comes to how mobile they are. And then they don't have the right resources to become stable within that mobility. So there's very common saying, stability within mobility. If, in my opinion, and a lot of physical therapists, especially in the area, are very focused on mobility and stretching and getting mobile, and that's why you're hurting. I think it's the exact opposite. I think you need to generate your stability within the mobility that you do have in order to stay healthy, as opposed to focusing on having all the mobility in the world and not focusing on your stability. So I don't care if someone's stiff everywhere, just as long as they're stable where they are. And then we can work on the mobility afterwards. But stability within the mobility that they do have is the priority before increasing mobility. 100%.
That's awesome, man. Hey, so we're coming up to the top of the hour or we are in it. And you know what I like to do here? I like to throw my guests into the wildfire here. So 3 actionable items that you can give our community right now they can use as soon as we get off this podcast. But I'm going to hold you to just 3 fitness things that they can do straight out of here.
All right. So 3 fitness.
And you can't say, come join Method Power. You can't say that.
But that would be such a great, well, unfortunately, you can't do that right now. It's closed down. But I think 3 things would be: 1, learn, like get off just and fact check me. If I was saying things, go research that, come up with an argument for it or against it and have a conversation with somebody about it. Just keep learning. The second one would be to develop a plan. So identify what you're going to learn. Maybe that would be first. But have a plan of action for what you're going to be doing over the next couple weeks when you get back into the gym. Have a plan for when you get back in and actualize on that plan. And then, man, I don't know what the third one would be. Really putting me on the spot here. But yeah, I think the third one would be to just relax and enjoy what's going on with the world right now. I think a lot of people are, and myself included, anxious to get back to things and anxious to get back and work with it, but find a way to continue to grow. There's things going around where people with a growth mindset in this time period, like you said, every day, like this podcast is built around, is everyday growth. Right. Is relax a little bit, take a step back, stop freaking out about things, and find a way to grow with what you have right now.
I love it, man. Dr. Gavin, thank you so much for being on, man. I really do appreciate it. If you could let the community know where they can find you at, what Instagrams you have, and how they can go and kind of give you an email to see if they want to be treated by you as well. Where can they go for all that good stuff, and what should they follow, my man?
So Instagram, Method Athletics, and Method Power Gym. Both of those are perfect. Send me a direct message on there if need be. You can reach me by email at Gavin, Gavin, at methodathletics.com, or just through our website too. We got forms to fill out on there. Really, any way that you want to get in touch, I'm there. You're going to be talking to me. You're not going to be talking to anybody else.
No automated person from India, right?
No secretary or anything either. It's a one-man show over here.
That's right. He's tired, kids. He's tired. I'm telling you what, the kid works his ass off. So, Gavin, thank you so much for being on, man. Thank you for your time and energy. I really do appreciate it. I know that time and energy you're not going to get back. So our community and myself really do appreciate you coming on, man. It's truly an honor to have you on and actually have the very first doctor on the podcast, man. So thank you so much for being here, man. I really do appreciate it.
Appreciate it as well.
All right, guys, go follow Dr. Gavin and Method Athletics and Method Power, guys. Till next time, peace and love.